UFC Shanghai is a little over a week away, and I'm pretty excited for this fight night. First off, it's always great to get out of the Apex. I also like these fight nights where a lot of the fighters have some sort of connection to the actual location, and that's definitely the case here with this Shanghai card. So in this video, going to be going through, giving my full card predictions, main card, and the prelims, picking a winner and how I think they get it done. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific matchups. And let's just dive right into it here. There's going to be some tough names on this one, so I apologize in advance. We are starting off right now with Diyar, Nurgozhay taking on Uran, Satybaldiev. These are actually two guys that had a little bit of hype coming into the UFC. Both were undefeated going into their UFC debuts. Both ended up losing. Now, the quality of losses weren't super similar for Nurgozhay. He was submitted by Brenton Ribeiro in a fight that, he probably should have won, at least in terms of like his reputation heading into the UFC. On the other side with Satybaldiev, he lost a short notice fight, very competitive matchup up at heavyweight against Martin Buday. And I think he came in weighed in at 220. Buday, someone who cuts down to 265. So there was a real size disadvantage for him in that matchup. So not really holding that loss against him a ton. For Diyar here, he has finished 8 of his 10 wins in his pro career, 6 by knockout, 2 by submission. I think the main thing you'll notice when you watch this dude fight, he has a really bad tick when he's in there where he is constantly rubbing his eye. And it's not like a Dustin Poirier, pull up the shorts every minute, 30 seconds. He will have an exchange, he'll get to range and just be doing this 5-6 times in a row. It seems like it would be pretty easy to exploit in terms of trying to throw shots when he's doing that, potentially shooting a takedown when he is rubbing the eye. And even if you can't really exploit it, you can just tell he's not going to do anything if he's standing there rubbing his eye, right? He's not going to be throwing shots when he's, in the middle of that tick. So that is not ideal. Also, the debut was just kind of rough. He was outstruck and outgrappled by Brenton Ribeiro, someone who has not had a ton of success in the UFC. On the other side here with Uran, he's a pretty long frame for light heavyweight, 6'4", 79-inch reach. He's finished 7 of his 9 pro wins, 6 of those by knockout, 1 by submission. Pretty well-rounded skill set, solid on the feet. Also can mix in his grappling, solid wrestler, can rack up some control time. He was the LFA champion, like I talked about, very competitive in his debut against Martin Buday in a fight that he was very, very undersized in. And like Buday, not necessarily a world beater, but very solid record at heavyweight, obviously up a weight class. So I am going to lean towards Uran in this matchup. I'll take him by decision. Both guys have had a lot of success finishing on the regional scene, but I do think this is, better competition on both sides than these guys are used to. So I think it goes the full 15, but I will go with Uran Satybaldiev. Then in this next matchup, we have Rongzhu taking on Su Young Yu. For Zhao here, he has a 27-9 record. I think he's only 27 years old. A lot of these Asian fighters have a ton of experience when they're still in their 20s. He has 9 submission wins, 5 knockouts. I think he's, put together 2 solid showings in his first couple of UFC fights, had a very close split decision loss to Chang Ho Lee. And then his most recent fight picked up his first UFC win with a knockout against Quan Lee. And those are not necessarily amazing opponents, not crazy strong strength of schedule, but solid guys who I think can hang around in the UFC. Chang Ho Lee actually picked up a pretty impressive recent win. Quan Lee also picked up his first win, I believe, in his last fight. So Rongzhu has solid grappling, good gas tank, but also very capable on the feet, like we saw in his most recent knockout win. And then for Yu here, he has a 2-0 UFC record, has faced some pretty weak competition. I think that first win was a road to the UFC final, a guy who has not gotten another shot in the UFC. And then his first, established in the UFC win was against AJ Cunningham, who unfortunately is just not UFC caliber. He's a tough dude, but just not someone who's going to hang around in the UFC. So Yu has a very grappling heavy style. Don't think he has a ton of finishing upside, limited ground and pound threat. Last 4 wins have all been by decision, but he can land the takedowns. He can rack up control time. In his 2 UFC fights, he's landed 7 total takedowns and had 13 total minutes of control. So that's going to be what he wants to do in this matchup. He is going to want to take Rongzhu down, just bank those rounds on the mat. I actually like Zhao Long as an underdog here. Do believe he is the betting underdog. He's a capable grappler, maybe not to the same extent as you, but I think he can be resilient defensively. We've kind of seen him get into these back and forth battles, especially in that fight against Chang Ho Lee, where both guys had some grappling success. They were both kind of rallying. He has good cardio. He can get into these competitive matchups and, still perform pretty well. And I do think he's going to have the edge on the feet. So I'm going to go with Long Zhao by decision here in an upset. Then we have Yizha taking on Westin Wilson. Yizha is a minus 1,400 favorite, and we have seen some big favorites throughout the history of the UFC, but I think you can make the case from like a talent and skill perspective. Like Yizha is probably the worst fighter to be this large of a favorite. Actually, maybe it was like the Maria Agapova fight. I think it was against like Shanna Dobson a few years ago. But like my overall point here is it seems kind of crazy that Yizha is minus 1,400. Like I don't think Westin Wilson's very good. I don't really think he's going to hang around in the UFC. But Yizha literally has an 0-2 UFC record. He does not have a UFC win, whereas Westin Wilson does. He is coming off a clear decision loss to Gabriel Santos. Showed some toughness, some durability in that fight, but, it was a clear loss for him. We have seen 14 of his 25 pro wins are by submission, so he's going to want to get the fight to the mat, use those submission skills. In his 2 UFC fights, though, he has kind of struggled to consistently get the takedowns, went 5 for 21 on takedowns in his first fight, and then 0 for 4 against Gabriel Santos. For Westin Wilson, he is just super rough on the feet. He's very hittable, not super durable. Also, like, it's not like he's hittable, but also has the ability to knock someone out or like really deal damage. Like there's kind of a minimal threat coming back at you. He was knocked out in the first round in his first 2 UFC fights, admittedly against pretty tough competition like Joanderson Brito, Jean Silva. Those are 2 very explosive, hard-hitting featherweights, like pretty tough matchups, but still got knocked out in round 1. He did pick up a win in his most recent fight, a first-round submission against Jekka Sargi. So I think Westin Wilson is going to, be completely fine inviting those grappling exchanges. 12 of his 17 wins are by submission. Now, this might sound kind of positive towards Westin Wilson. I am still picking Yizha on this matchup. I'm picking him by round 2 knockout. But I still think like minus 1,400 just seems crazy, especially given the fact that like Yizha's kind of like ideal, I guess, way this fight plays out in terms of like where he wants the fight to take place probably is an area where Westin Wilson is somewhat confident in. So I think the odds are crazy, but I'm still going to be going with Yizha. I think he could find, the finish on the feet, or just, gas Westin Wilson out, land some ground and pound, get the finish that way. But I think he gets it done by knockout in the second round. Then we have Michel Pereira taking on Kyle Daukaus. I believe Daukaus is a short notice replacement here for Michel Pereira's former opponent. It's good to see Daukaus back in the UFC. He's gone 4-0 on the regional scene since getting cut. I do think even though this is short notice, he's going to be prepared. Like he's been throwing his name in the hat for a lot of potential matchups. He finally got one. I don't think this is a situation where he's going to look like way out of shape, like he's coming off the couch, hasn't been training. I think he's going to be pretty ready for this fight, as far as short notice matchups go. He's going to want to grapple in this matchup, set up his submission game. 11 of his 15 wins are by submission. When we look at his 2 UFC wins, one was a submission against Jamie Pickett. The other one was a very control-heavy decision win over Dustin Stoltzfus, where he racked up 9 minutes of control time. I think the biggest issue I've seen with Kyle Daukaus and like his run in the UFC, he's really just lacked like the requisite physicality and athleticism of some of like the legit contenders at middleweight. Like he only has a 25% takedown accuracy, hasn't been able to consistently wrestle. He was dropped 4 times in the UFC compared to landing 0 knockdowns of his own. For Michel Pereira on the other side, his middleweight run started really hot, and then he has just really hit a wall with his last couple of fights. So he started off 3-0, and not just like squeaking by wins, like winning decisions, just like completely nuking dudes. He had wins in 54 seconds, 61 seconds, and then 66 seconds, so just running through the competition. Then in back-to-back fights, he has been dominated by Anthony Hernandez, was finished in round 5. There was a scorecard going into round 5 where a judge scored round 2, 3, and 4 all as 10-8s. So this was like not even close to a competitive matchup. And then in his most recent fight against Abus, it was just a bad showing. Like he looked super gun shy, but then he was also tired without having a lot of output. It was very odd where we've seen Michel Pereira gas. Like, he's an explosive dude. He doesn't have good cardio. He's going to throw, these super explosive shots, and he will fade. But we hadn't really seen him gas while doing nothing, which is pretty concerning. So he's very dangerous early on, but we can see him wilt. So you can certainly see the path for, Kyle Daukaus to get his wrestling going, survive the first round, pull away in the second and third rounds. Like, that is a reasonable path to victory. I still am going to side with Michel Pereira here just because he is so dangerous in that first round. I do think he's going to end up finding the finish. I'm going Michel Pereira round 1 knockout. Then moving over to Rongzhu taking on Austin Hubbard. For Rongzhu, he is coming off a 30-27 win against Cody Steele, a fight that he was close to a 3-1 dog in. So upset win, looked really good. It was a very clear dub for him. He's primarily a striker. 14 of his 26 wins are by knockout, but also capable on the ground, 7 submission wins, solid output, averages 5.9 significant strikes per minute, solid takedown defense, 84%. I will say if he does get taken down, the submission defense is a little bit questionable. 4 of his 6 losses have come by sub. For Austin Hubbard, he is 1-3 since getting back into the UFC. Has had some somewhat competitive fights, like back-to-back split decision losses. I did feel like he lost both of those fights, and not that like they could have been just complete toss-ups, which is kind of what a split decision tells you. He's going to go out there. He's going to want a grimy fight. He's going to want to use his wrestling. He is pretty durable. He's never been knocked out, never even been dropped in the UFC, but he also kind of lacks his own finishing upside, where he only has 1 finish in the UFC, and he has not landed a single knockdown. So I'm going to go with Rongzhu here. I think his wrestling defense is good enough that he's going to be able to keep this on the feet for, a meaningful portion of this fight. And I do think he's just going to be the better, more dangerous striker. And I think he's going to pick up a decision win. Could land some big shots on the feet, but Hubbard is pretty durable, so I do think it goes the full 15 minutes. Then I believe we have a couple more fights before we get to the main card. One of those is going to be Maheshate taking on Gage Young. Maheshate is 2-3 in the UFC. He had his first win in the UFC as a knockout against Steve Garcia. That is a fight that is aging very, very well. But since then, he has gone 1-3. He's been dropped 5 times in his last 2 fights, which is, pretty rough. He's primarily a striker. He has not landed a single takedown in the UFC, but he also is just taking a lot of damage. He absorbs 1.2 significant strikes per minute more than he's landing, which is a pretty tough, difference there. He's also showcased kind of some limiting finishing upside, even though he did knock out Steve Garcia. He's not finding those finishes in the UFC, even pre-UFC against weaker comp, not necessarily a super dangerous guy in terms of finding the finish. On the other side here with Gage Young, he is 9-3 as a pro. He lost his UFC debut against Evan Elder, but it was a respectable showing. It was like one of those fights that was like a clear win for Evan Elder, but it was somewhat competitive, where it's not like, Gage Young was just getting blown out of the water. He was doing his thing. He was landing his shots. Evan Elder, just did a better job. He is a solid gas tank. He attacked all 3 levels in that UFC debut. We did see him get out-grappled by Quillen Salkild on the Contender Series, and he also has a pretty weak, pre-UFC strength of schedule. But in some of these matchups where you have 2 guys, not, the most skilled dudes, not the most talented, probably not going to be top 15 guys, you want to just kind of latch on to a few characteristics. And for me, I like the output and the durability of Gage Young, where I can trust him to stay in there. I don't think he's going to get knocked out in this matchup. I think he's going to throw a lot out there. There's a lot to be judged. I think he can win rounds that way. And so they might not both be UFC quality, but I'm going to lean towards Gage Young here to pick up a decision win. Then I don't think this one's actually officially the featured prelim. This is a fight that should be on the main card, in my opinion. Got more of that flyweight disrespect, but it is Loner Kavanagh taking on Charles Johnson. And Charles Johnson just does not take easy fights. It seems like he's a guy who 100% should be in the top 15, and he just keeps taking on the top prospect at flyweight. If you're a flyweight that has some sort of hype, you are probably going to fight Charles Johnson before you get that shot. into the top 15, and we've seen some dudes pass that test, some guys haven't. He is 6-5 in the UFC, has wins most notably against Joshua Van, but also against Azad Maxim, Sumudaerji, who's a solid fighter, who's also going to be competing on this Shanghai card. Charles Johnson is a big flyweight, big frame, 5'9", 70-inch reach. He's going to use that frame to fight from the outside. He's going to push a solid pace. Someone who really builds as the fight goes on, where he might drop round 1, but he's going to pick up the pace and has a better shot of winning the last 2 rounds. He's also landed knockdowns in his last 3 wins, and even though he's primarily a striker, that's like his go-to, he's not against mixing in the wrestling if he needs to. Does have some questionable takedown defense, 67%. We have seen him in his losses specifically get taken down, get held there, and kind of lose rounds that way. So he's been taken down at least 3 times in 4 of his 5 losses, so that has kind of been an issue. Don't think that's going to be a huge problem here against Loner Kavanagh, who's primarily known as a striker. He's a fun prospect, 9-0 record, only 26 years old. He's definitely on the smaller end for flyweight, where he's like 5'4" with a 67-inch reach. I do think he's the better athlete in this matchup. He's super explosive. I think he hits harder. 2-0 so far in the UFC with decision wins over Felipe Dos Santos and Jose Ochoa. I will say he showed some wrestling upside in his last win, 4 for 6 on takedowns, racked up 6.5 minutes of control time. Even if striking is going to be his bread and butter, I do like when these strikers go out there and at least have the ability to push the wrestling. If you get into trouble, you're not having a ton of success, it's definitely something you can fall back on versus like just needing to be the better striker in every single matchup. So I do like that he has that in his bag, kind of similar to Charles Johnson, where Charles Johnson's like main area where he wants to fight is going to be on the feet. But if things aren't going great, he does have the ability to, get in there, get into the clinch, land some takedowns. So in this matchup, you definitely cannot count Charles Johnson out. We've seen him go out there and upset some of these, young, fun prospects. But I'm also pretty high on Loner Kavanagh, and I am going to lean towards him in this matchup. Now, I don't know if the margins are going to be crazy, but I think he's going to win a competitive decision. A lot of these flyweight fights, they're very close. I don't think there's going to be a finish in this fight, so I will pick Loner Kavanagh by decision. Then I believe this is the start of the main card. The bout order could change. I don't know why this specific fight is the first one on the main card, but we have Taiyilake Nueraji taking on Kiefer Crosbie. For Crosbie, I don't think he's super UFC caliber. Nueraji, kind of more of an unknown. We don't really know yet. He has an 11-1 record, 10 wins by knockout. He has never been to decision in his career. He's a pretty solid frame for welterweight, 6'2", 76.5-inch reach. He's a southpaw on the feet, good knees, does kind of lunge into range a little bit recklessly, but also makes him dangerous, fairly explosive, can get that left hand going. On the other side for Kiefer Crosbie, he is 0-2 in the UFC. Both of his losses are by round 1 submission. He's really struggled versus legit competition, even outside the UFC. I think the best win on his resume is outside the UFC against Cowboy Oliveira, but a very washed version of Cowboy Oliveira. And then he's been finished in all 4 of his losses. So you can probably tell based on those predictions, I am going to lean towards Nueraji here. Obviously, just less established in terms of actually seeing him against UFC competition, but I'm going to pick him by round 2 knockout. Kiefer Crosbie, not super susceptible to getting knocked out, but just the way Nueraji fights, he's pretty aggressive, he's going to throw big shots, and I think he's going to end up finding that finish in the second round. Then we have Sumudaerji taking on Kevin Borjas. Fun matchup here at flyweight. We have Sumudaerji coming off his first win since 2021. He's a southpaw striker, laser left hand, some solid kicks, pretty big frame for the weight class, where I think he's listed at 5'7". I think he's probably taller than that, but really long arms, 72-inch reach. And we've seen his last 4 opponents just really go out there and push a wrestling-heavy game plan. I think this is finally a matchup where his opponent is going to be totally fine just standing and banging with him, and that is Kevin Borjas. He picked up his first UFC win in March, a unanimous decision win against Lazy Boy, someone who had a decent amount of hype heading into that UFC Mexico card. Borjas is a sharp striker. He is super fast, works the body well, did actually drop Joshua Van in his fight against Van. I don't think it officially counted as a drop, but clipped him, kind of went to the mat, so I'm willing to count it, especially to prop him up here. And he hits hard, got a powerful right hand, able to string combinations together, can switch stances during those combinations. And I think this is a fun battle because it is like this open stance matchup where both guys have really nice, fast, powerful rear hands. And those are going to be open here with the open stances. I'm slightly leaning towards Sumudaerji by decision, but kind of similar to the other flyweight fight. Like, I do think it's going to be close. I do think it's going to be pretty competitive, and I could see either guy winning, but I will side with Sumudaerji. And now that I'm actually talking about this, I guess maybe because Sumudaerji has the connection, right, as like an Asian fighter, but it seems crazy that this is a flyweight fight on the main card over Charles Johnson versus Loner Kavanagh, where I think you could argue like Charles Johnson and Loner Kavanagh are both better than the two guys in this matchup, but whatever. If you complain about bout order, you'll be complaining all day. Then I think in the final three fights here, these are like the three big-time matchups, probably the ones I'm most excited about, plus that Kavanagh-Johnson matchup. We have Sergei Pavlovich taking on Waldo Cortes-Acosta, and I don't want to be the guy who's throwing, aura out there and all this stuff, but for Sergei Pavlovich, I do think it's fair to say his aura has taken a massive hit over his last three fights. I mean, this was a dude who was viewed as like the most terrifying guy in the weight class. Before the Tom Aspinall title fight, he was on a 6-fight round 1 knockout streak. He hit so hard, he would just pressure dudes. He would take some shots, but it didn't matter because he just hit way harder. He was durable. And then he goes out there, actually does clip Tom Aspinall kind of early on in that fight, but then obviously gets knocked out by Tom Aspinall. Then he has the Alexander Volkov fight where he loses pretty convincingly in a decision. And then he picks up a 30-27 win against Jairzinho Rozenstruik in his last fight. But it does seem like that confidence and killer instinct has kind of taken a hit over his last few matchups. And I do think, like, kind of looking back on it, the back-to-back fights of Aspinall and Volkov is kind of tough, just like in the sequencing of it, where, all right, the confidence takes a hit. He's gun shy after he gets knocked out by Tom Aspinall. And then Volkov's probably like the worst matchup for someone who is gun shy and like lacking confidence because he has that huge frame. He's just going to be able to pick you apart from the outside. And so if there's like any hesitancy from Pavlovich, like you need to go in there and fight aggressively, close the distance on Volkov. And if you're, a little bit sketched out, like that's just a fight that you can look pretty bad in. And he did. But then the Jairzinho fight, like I guess you could say Jairzinho also kind of fights from range, uses the kicks, but like that's a matchup where pre-Aspinall, Sergei would have just gone Marauder mode and found a way to put him away. Like we saw him just go out there, blitz Derek Lewis, blitz Tai Tuivasa, blitz Curtis Blades, and he just didn't do it in that fight. So Sergei is going to be at his best when he is fighting aggressively, pushing forward, using his boxing, and just getting that power out there. The dude hits so unbelievably hard. He just needs to be a little bit more aggressive than we've seen in some of his last couple fights. On the other side here with Cortes-Acosta, he's on a 5-fight winning streak, coming off a somewhat controversial win against Sergei Spivak. Could have gone either way. He's primarily a boxer, but does throw some leg kicks in there. So just overall decent skill set for heavyweight. Pushes a decent pace, 6 significant strikes per minute, but has shown some limited finishing upside where it's kind of rare for these heavyweights to be like strikers and not have a ton of power and kind of make a push in the weight class. Like he has 2 knockdowns in 8 UFC fights, which is very low for someone with, his overall style. I think this is a pretty favorable matchup for Sergei Pavlovich. This is like the matchup he wants, right? He doesn't want to be grappled. He doesn't want someone to pick him apart from range. He wants to get into a boxing fight, hands versus hands. And he just has, I think, the speed advantage. And I think he has the major power advantage in this matchup. Maybe it's not a clear speed advantage. Like Waldo Cortes-Acosta does have some pretty quick hands for heavyweight, but like the power difference is extreme. And so I think both guys are going to be able to land their shots, but I just trust Sergei's power a hell of a lot more than I trust Waldo Cortes-Acosta's. So I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich, round 1 knockout. Typically, if Sergei's picking up a win, it's going to be in the first round. Maybe we get another like super gun-shy fight, but if he does fight gun-shy against Cortes-Acosta, he might just end up losing it, but Sergei will be my pick. I think we get a bounce-back performance. Also just hoping for it because I think the heavyweight division is way more exciting when Sergei Pavlovich is fighting like that marauder and picking up those big wins. Then we have arrived at the co-main event, and I believe this is officially a 5-round fight. I know when the UFC showed the card, it said 5 rounds. Tapology still says 3, but I'm going to break this down as if it is a 5-round fight because it should be a 5-round fight. And I think this is a fun matchup, but also just kind of like weird stylistically. Like initially when it was announced, I was excited. I thought it was a fun matchup. Then when I tried to start breaking it down, there's just a lot of weird factors that are tough to kind of work through. Right now, Aljamain Sterling is like a 3-1 favorite, minus 300. That seems a little bit wide to me, just in kind of a funky fight here. He has looked really good at 145, had the 30-27 win against Calvin Kattar, had the competitive, super fun grappling loss against Movsar Evloev. He's got funky striking on the feet from the Funkmaster. He's going to be looking to grapple, though. That's obviously where he's getting his best work done. Great back takes, able to rack up control time. In his 2 fights at 145, he has landed 14 total takedowns. And I know Movsar ended up getting the edge in that decision win, but like he still had a lot of success against Movsar, who is a very, very good wrestler at 145. Then for Brian Ortega, I think this is an interesting matchup for him because it's very rare for one of his opponents to like willingly want to grapple him. And I do think Aljo's going to want to grapple Brian Ortega. Typically, he's been going up against these strikers that are just doing like everything possible to not get submitted by him. The issue here for Ortega is that he has looked pretty rough in his last couple of fights. He was someone where one of his like calling cards was his durability, where even though he was finished by Max Holloway due to doctor stoppage, he absorbed a crazy amount of damage, wasn't fading away. He took a ton of damage against Volk, still rallied, and I think won the 5th round and at least 2 of the scorecards. But we have seen him get hurt very badly in back-to-back fights. Now, he did come back and beat Yair Rodriguez after getting hurt badly in the first. The Diego Lopez fight, like he pretty much got put out cold and then was woken up by the second shot that Diego Lopez landed. Obviously still went the distance, but it's not great that now he is getting dropped and hurt way more consistently. We know he has super dangerous jiu-jitsu. 8 of his 16 pro wins are by submission. Also has that proven 5-round cardio. And then I think you could probably make the case that he's the more dangerous striker. We also just haven't seen like extended periods of Aljo on the feet where he's almost just always pushing the grappling. He's like not getting into back and forth striking matches. But like Ortega did knock out Frankie Edgar. He landed 2 knockdowns on the Korean Zombie. I know these fights are like, 5+ years ago, but still think they should be pointed out here. And so I am really conflicted in this matchup, even though Aljo's like the big favorite. I do think he's the better MMA grappler. I think he's going to have the physicality advantage, specifically in the grappling. But Brian Ortega's always live for a submission. We know he can pull these submissions out of pretty much anywhere. I also think Ortega is like the bigger knockout threat, where I know the durability's fading, but I don't really think Aljo's going to test that. Ortega does hit kind of hard, even though his striking isn't great, and he is kind of hittable on the feet. And I also think we could see Aljo go super hard in the grappling, Ortega do a decent job defensively, and then we see Aljo start to fade, and Ortega potentially pulls away just using that cardio. So I have gone back and forth. I think Ortega is a very live dog, but I will slightly lean towards Aljamain Sterling winning by decision. It is just such a weird matchup. Like, I feel like, like my brain is all twisted around trying to break this one down. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, how are you guys looking at this Aljo Brian Ortega fight? Because I think just from like a where they stand in their career versus the rest of the weight class, like I have more confidence in Aljo, but just for this one specific matchup, we also don't have a huge sample size of guys like actually trying to take Ortega down and being able to control him. I know Diego Lopez racked up some control time, but I don't know, just an interesting matchup between those two. And then we've officially arrived at the main event where we have Johnny Walker taking on Mingyang Zhang. I understand why this one is the main event, but it's listed for 5 rounds. If this went 5 rounds, I would be shocked. I guess this would be like the Johnny Walker, Thiago Santos fight going 5. But these are 2 very, very dangerous light heavyweights. Johnny Walker finished 19 of his 21 wins. 26 of his 30 fights have ended inside the distance. Has had a rough stretch as of late. Last 3 fights, 0-2 with 1 no contest. He has been knocked out in back-to-back fights. He's at this point now where he is dangerous, but man, he is very, very chinny. He's been knocked out in 6 of his 9 losses. He's been knocked out in his last 3 losses in the UFC. And it does feel like he's overall kind of regressed in recent years, where when he's fighting, it's like you can tell he's worried about his durability, but that almost just makes it worse because you could at least like kind of pitch him as like, all right, he's a glass cannon where you could clip him, you could hurt him, but he's going to throw a ton out there. He's going to be super explosive. He might be able to catch you. Now that he's a little bit more patient, a little bit more passive, it's like the durability issues are still there and he's not good defensively, but then he also has less finishing upside, which is overall just like a net negative for his upside in any given matchup. On the other side here with Zhang Mingyang, He's a fun prospect. Rare to say at 205. They're just like not a ton of up and comers, and the ones that are kind of rising just aren't really standing out. He's only 26 years old, already has 25 pro fights, which is just insane experience at 26 years old. He is also kill or be killed. He has finished all 19 of his wins. Only one total fight he's had has gone to decision, and I think he has like 5 or 6 losses. So he is getting finished when he's losing. He is 4-0 in the UFC. All of them have been round 1 knockouts, coming off a KO against Anthony Smith in his retirement fight. He's very aggressive on the feet. He has power in both hands, really good in the clinch, can land some big knees, elbows. Also just has like a lot of confidence, where you could potentially like say him and Walker are somewhat similar in terms of like the aggressiveness, maybe not being the most durable guys. They're kind of hittable, but they're both very dangerous. But I think the difference is this is like Zhang Mingyang before he's kind of been, I don't want to say fraud checked, but like before he's faced any adversity in the UFC, where I just think he has way more confidence at this point than Johnny Walker. And, I know it's a mental thing, but I think it can show itself in a fight. And I do think that's going to help Zhang Mingyang in this matchup. So both are going to be live for a finish. This is a fight that I do think is going to end quickly, but I have to side with Zhang Mingyang here. I trust his durability a little bit more. He's just more proven recently in terms of actually landing those big shots. Obviously, it's MMA math, but looked great against Anthony Smith. Johnny Walker had a very weird, lacking killer instinct win against Anthony Smith, the one where Walker was threatening his family. So I'm going to go with Zhang Mingyang here, going round 1 knockout. Like I said, I think both could win, but I do think he gets the win in front of the home crowd. So that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree, disagree with my picks? Let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.